The dust of Elmsfield was a fine red powder that seemed less a part of the landscape and more a state of being. For 18-year-old Lily Harding, it was the defining feature of a life she found increasingly suffocating. It settled on the polished star her father, Sheriff Mac Harding, wore so proudly, and it coated the delicate lace curtains of her bedroom window, a constant reminder of the world beyond her reach, a world that felt as static and predictable as the main street she could see from her porch. She was the sheriff's little girl, a role she performed with a quiet desperation, organizing church socials and smiling politely at the sons of local ranchers, all while her soul screamed for something she couldn't name. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage, the door wide open but her own fear and conditioning keeping her firmly perched inside. This deep-seated yearning was a quiet hum beneath the surface of her dutiful existence, a dissonant chord that sounded every time her father called her his little girl. With a mixture of pride and possession, a title that felt less like an endearment and more like a life sentence. The change, when it came, did not arrive quietly. It rode in on a horse named Titan, a beast as massive and dark as the man astride him. The man was Colt, a drifter hired by the struggling Henderson Ranch to break a new herd of wild mustangs brought down from the northern hills. He was a giant, well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the afternoon sun and hands that looked capable of holding lightning. The town's gossip mill, usually grinding slowly, went into a frenzy at his arrival. Whispers of bar fights and snapped bones followed him, painting a picture of a raw, untamed force of nature. Sheriff Harding watched him from his office window with the weary, ingrained suspicion he reserved for all unknowns, his jaw tightening as Colt dismounted with a surprising, fluid grace that belied his immense size. "Just see he does his job and moves on, Lily." He'd grumbled over a supper of stew and cornbread, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Men like that are storms. You just board up the windows and wait for them to pass." But Lily wasn't interested in boarding up her windows. From her secret perch by her window, she began a covert study of the man they called a storm. She watched him in the Hendersons' corral, a solitary figure moving in a silent, powerful dance with the terrified mustangs. He wasn't brutal. He was patient, his deep voice a steady, rumbling counterpoint to the animals' frantic whinnies. He spoke to them, not at them, his movements economical and deliberate, exuding a calm authority that the horses, in time, seemed to recognize and respect. She saw the way he would run a hand along a trembling flank, not to dominate, but to soothe, and she saw a startling tenderness in his eyes that the town's rumors had completely missed. This quiet observation sparked a dangerous, thrilling curiosity in her, a feeling so alien and potent it made her heart race. It was this burgeoning fascination that led her to the creek that afternoon, her sketchbook a flimsy shield for her true intentions, a silent hope thrumming in her veins that she might catch a closer glimpse of the enigma that was challenging the very foundations of her small, dusty world. Secret meetings by the creek became the clandestine heart of Lily's existence, the axis upon which her entire world now precariously and thrillingly turned. She lived for the stolen afternoons, her sketchbook a flimsy but effective alibi, her senses heightened to every sound that might betray her, the distant call of a ranch hand, the particular crunch of her father's truck tires on gravel. Each journey to the water's edge was a rebellion, a silent declaration of a selfhood she was only just discovering. In that secluded space, the labels of sheriff's daughter and giant drifter fell away, leaving only Lily and Colt. She learned that his imposing size intimidated people into assuming a simplicity of mind, but she found his thoughts to be sharp, his observations keen, and his past a tapestry woven with threads of quiet sorrow and hard-won, solitary wisdom. He spoke of deserts that stretched to eternity and mountains that pierced a sky so clear it felt like looking into God's own eye. And with every story, the walls of Elmsfield seemed to shrink another inch. He never called her little girl. The word Lily On his lips was a complete sentence, an acknowledgment of her as a whole person. In return, she saw the profound solitude of the man beneath the myth, the careful way he moderated his movements so as not to startle her, the way his laughter, a low, warm rumble that seemed to rise from the very earth, was a gift he gave sparingly. The attraction between them was a live wire, humming in the silence that sometimes fell between their easy conversations. It was in the way his blue eyes would sometimes drop to her lips, lingering a second too long, or the way his large, calloused hands would twitch at his sides, as if physically fighting the urge to reach out and trace the line of her jaw. He was a perfect gentleman, a fortress of self-imposed restraint, but the heat of the fortress walls was palpable, and Lily found she wanted nothing more than to see them fall. The danger of their connection was a potent, addictive part of its allure. Her father's initial distrust of Colt had curdled into something colder and harder, a granite-like hostility. "I see that look in your eye when you come back from your walks, your hair all windswept," he had accused her one evening, his voice grinding out like gravel under a boot heel. He stood between her and the front door, his broad frame blocking the fading light. "You stay away from that man, Lily. He's raw, uncivilized. He's seen things and done things you can't even imagine. A man like that. He doesn't think about tomorrow. He'll take what he wants from you and leave you in ruins, and I'll be left to pick up the pieces." His words didn't frighten her. They ignited a cold, clean fury. She wasn't a prized heifer to be guarded at the county fair, nor was she a fragile porcelain doll on a shelf. Colt, for all his raw power, saw the strength in her that her own father willfully ignored, and that recognition was a key turning in the lock of her heart. The inevitable confrontation erupted on a night thick with the promise of a summer storm, the air heavy and electric. Sheriff Harding, fueled by protective rage and cheap whiskey, had confronted Colt publicly in the saloon, jabbing a finger into the worn leather of his vest and warning him in low, venomous tones to stay away from his daughter if he knew what was good for him. The entire bar had gone silent, watching the sheriff poke the bear. Colt, to everyone's surprise, had said nothing, merely finishing his beer with a slow, deliberate calm that seemed to infuriate her father more than any retort could have. Furious, feeling caged and infantilized, Lily waited until her father was called away to a late night disturbance on the other side of the county. The moment his taillights disappeared, she slipped out into the charged night, her heart a wild drum in her chest, and ran to the creek, her thin summer dress clinging to her legs in the humid air. She knew, with a certainty that felt as deep as the ancient creek bed, that he would be there. She found him standing by the water, a silhouette of immense power and stillness, the moonlight etching the hard lines of his shoulders. He turned as she approached, his expression grim, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks. "Lily, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough with unnamed emotion. "Your father is wrong," she stated, her voice trembling but firm, cutting through the thrum of the crickets. She stepped closer, deep into his space, forcing him to look down at her, refusing to be dismissed. "He thinks I'm a child who doesn't know her own mind, but I do. I know it better than I ever have." The air between them crackled, the tension so thick it was a physical presence. Colt's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along its line. "I'm not a good man, Lily," he warned, a last desperate defense. "I've done things, my hands, they're not clean. And I've done nothing," she whispered, the words a confession and a challenge. She closed the final breathless distance between them, her body almost touching his, feeling the heat radiating from him. "I'm so tired of doing nothing, of being nothing but a reflection of what he wants to see. I choose this. I choose you." And before her courage could fail her, she stood on her toes, placed her hands on his chest, and pressed her lips to his in an innocent, clumsy kiss. It was a spark to tinder, For a heartbeat, he was rigid, a statue fighting against its own nature. Then, with a groan that was half surrender, half prayer, his arms wrapped around her, engulfing her completely. His kiss was not clumsy. It was deep, possessive, and devastatingly gentle all at once. A raw and honest expression of everything they had been holding back. A storm breaking not in violence, but in a long, awaited, life-giving rain. He did not lead her to the hard, open ground by the creek, but instead took her hand, his own engulfing hers completely, and guided her through the moon, dappled darkness to the small, abandoned line shack he was using on the Henderson property. It was a sparse, single-room structure, smelling strongly of old leather, fresh hay, and the faint, clean scent of saddle soap. The moment the wooden door clicked shut behind them, the world outside, her father's fury, the town's expectations, the dusty, confining streets of Elms Field, ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, the soft rustle of the night wind against the roof, and the terrifying, exhilarating precipice they were about to step over together. In the dim light of a single kerosene lamp, Lily's virginity was not a prize for him to take, but a gift she was determined to give, a conscious choice to shed the skin of the girl she had been. Her hands, small and pale against the weathered leather of his vest, trembled as she began to work the first stubborn button. Colt's large, work-roughened hands came up to cover hers, stilling their nervous movement. His touch was not to stop her, but to anchor her. "Lily," he said, his voice a raw, strained whisper that filled the quiet space between them. "Look at me. Are you sure about this path? There's no going back from it. Once we start down this road, everything changes." His eyes, a startling, intense blue even in the low light, searched hers, begging for honesty, for certainty. He was giving her every chance to retreat, to return to the safety of her old life, and in doing so, he was proving himself to be the exact opposite of the man her father had described. "Good," she breathed out, her voice gaining strength as she held his gaze without flinching. "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward with you." The resolve in her own voice surprised and empowered her. What followed was a profound lesson in contrast. His hands, which could effortlessly bend steel and subdue a wild stallion, traced the lines of her body with a reverence that made her want to weep. He was endlessly, achingly patient, his touch a slow, worshipful exploration as he peeled away the layers of her simple dress and her own ingrained fears. He was learning the landscape of her, committing every curve and sigh to memory, and in his careful, deliberate attention she felt not small, but precious, not weak, but powerful in her newfound vulnerability, her trust in him becoming her greatest strength. When the moment of true joining finally came, there was a sharp, stretching pain that made her gasp and her nails dig reflexively into the hard muscles of his back. Colt froze instantly, his entire body rigid with the Herculean effort of his control, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow. "Look at me, Lily," he murmured, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of sensation. "Just keep your eyes on me." She did, drowning in the deep, calm pools of his blue eyes, and as the initial, shocking pain began to recede, it was replaced by something else entirely, a profound, shocking feeling of completeness, of a deep, soul-level connection, of being utterly and completely known. He began to move again, a slow, deep, and primal rhythm that was as ancient as the earth and as tender as a first kiss. He was stretching her, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, breaking apart the confines of the girl she had been and making a sacred, welcoming space for the woman she was destined to become. Afterward, wrapped in the solid, grounding warmth of his arms, with the sound of a gentle rain beginning its soft patter on the wooden, shingled roof, Lily felt no shame, no regret, only a profound and settling peace that seeped deep into her bones. She had given herself willingly, raw and honest, to a man who had handled her heart and her body with more care and reverence than anyone ever had. She was no longer Daddy's little girl. She was her own woman, a fact now sealed in the quiet intimacy of this humble shack. As she lay there, tracing the faint, white lines of an old scar on Colt's shoulder with a tentative finger, she knew with unshakable certainty that whatever storm came next, her father's fury, the town's judgment, the uncertainty of the future, they would face it together. The giant cowboy hadn't ruined the sheriff's virgin daughter. He had simply, patiently, and lovingly helped her find the fierce, independent woman who had been trapped inside all along. And in the raw, honest space they had created together, a new, braver life was finally beginning to bloom.